Jerusalem has seen cycles of absolute peace and absolute slaughter. Its walls have sheltered a bloodless surrender and witnessed the systematic execution of tens of thousands. Look at the stone exterior of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. When Caliph Umar first entered this city over 1,000 years ago, he established Muslim worship without a single casualty. He negotiated a peaceful surrender that left the Christian and Jewish residents completely unharmed. But that unified strength proved temporary. Over the next few centuries, the vast Islamic empire fractured into rival dynasties, and local governors engaged in a series of petty civil wars. Thousands of miles away, Pope Urban II watched this infighting. Seeing the Middle East divided and defenseless, he rallied an army of 150,000 crusaders to march toward Jerusalem. This medieval manuscript depicts the brutal siege warfare of the era. When the Crusader forces breached the walls, they killed nearly 100,000 Muslims and Jews in a matter of days. They even turned the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque into a stable for their horses. The Crusaders reached the city because the Muslim forces were already busy fighting themselves. Powerful empires rarely fall to outside forces until they first collapse from within. Even after losing Jerusalem, the remaining Muslim leaders were too divided to mount a counterattack. A deep paralysis set in across the region. To make matters worse, a secretive rogue cult known as the Hashashin, the Assassins, took advantage of the growing chaos. They began systematically murdering top Muslim generals and political figures under the cover of night. Paranoia gripped the leadership. In one instance, a suspected cult member's home was searched, only for authorities to discover a mass grave of 40 bodies hidden directly under her bed. How could anyone possibly retake the most heavily fortified city in the world when the military leadership was terrified of their own shadows? This photograph shows the ancient walls of Damascus. Within this intellectual and military hub, a young man named Salahuddin Ayyubi was rigorously trained in warfare and strategy, despite being born during a forced exile. Salahuddin recognized an inescapable logistical reality. Marching on Jerusalem was impossible while rival Muslim factions were still pointing swords at each other. So he spent years methodically bringing these fragmented territories under a single command structure, sweeping from Egypt all the way up through Syria. At the same time, he launched a crackdown on the Hashashin. He tracked down their hidden strongholds and dismantled the cult, removing the threat of internal assassination. Salahuddin's eventual success relied on his political patience. He spent a decade building an unbreakable unified front before he ever turned his attention toward Jerusalem. War finally broke out when a cruel Crusader governor named Reynald slaughtered a Muslim pilgrim caravan and openly insulted the Prophet Muhammad. In response, the Crusader king made a massive tactical error, marching his army across the scorching July desert to attack Salahuddin head-on. You can see the fatal flaw here. Salahuddin intentionally positioned his army directly in front of that water source, completely cutting off the Crusaders' access. Dehydrated and exhausted, the Crusader forces were easily surrounded. Salahuddin's troops then set the dry desert brush on fire, choking the trapped soldiers with thick smoke. The Crusader force was utterly destroyed. Salahuddin personally executed Reynald for his crimes, but following the customs of leadership, he spared the life of the Crusader king. The Battle of Hattin was won before a single sword clashed. It remains a masterclass in using an enemy's logistical arrogance against them. With the main Crusader army eliminated, Salahuddin marched on Jerusalem. Inside the walls, the terrified Crusader population braced for a revenge massacre, expecting the Muslims to return the brutality from 90 years prior. The Crusader commander, Balian, issued a desperate ultimatum. If Salahuddin didn't allow them to surrender, Balian swore he would reduce the city to ashes, including the Golden Dome of the Rock seen here. Salahuddin delivered a counteroffer that stunned the Crusaders. Modeling his actions after the Prophet Muhammad's peaceful return to Mecca, he granted total amnesty for all Christians in the city. He guaranteed safe passage for refugees and placed guards to protect Christian churches. When thousands of poor Crusaders couldn't pay the small exit tax, Salahuddin and his brother used their own personal gold to buy their freedom. Salahuddin secured his legacy as a hero across both the Islamic and Western worlds. because he possessed absolute power over his enemies, yet chose restraint over revenge. Salahuddin passed away a few years later, with only a single coin to his name, but the unified empire he built kept Jerusalem secure for over 7 centuries. Look at the faces of these Ottoman soldiers during World War I. They represented the last great unified Muslim power, but disastrous alliances during the war caused the empire to fracture under the pressure. As the Ottoman Empire broke apart into separate, vulnerable states, British troops easily swept through the region, marching straight into Jerusalem and seizing Palestine. The echoes of that ancient conflict still resonate today. When discussing modern military interventions in the Middle East, Western leaders like George W. Bush have explicitly used the word crusade to describe their campaigns. The record of this ancient city suggests a pattern. Jerusalem remains secure only as long as its defenders are unified. With the old internal divisions returning, the question is whether the cycle of the Crusades is simply starting again.